Welcome to the session on the Enhanced Communication on Progress questionnaire. Thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Bernard Frey. I'm with the Communication on Progress team at the UN Global Compact. Today we are joined by my UN Global Compact colleagues, Grit Qatar and Colleen Connors from our Labor and Human Rights teams, and by Adrienne Gardas from the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights, and by Emily Sims from the International Labour Organizations. Some general housekeeping for today's session to start with. Please direct all questions to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please take a second to locate the Q&A feature right now. Questions that will not be answered today will be answered in writing in a follow-up to this session. You will find the information, among others, on the landing page of the Early Adopter Program at the Academy. The session will also be recorded and made available on demand on the Academy platform of the UN Global Compact. Live transcription is also available in English by clicking on the live transcript icon. Translation for the session is available into Spanish by clicking the globe icon on the bottom of the screen. Hay interpretación al español apretando el botón que se encuentra abajo en la pantalla. Our aim for today is to address the following objectives: review the overall structure and content of the Enhanced Communication on Progress, provide an introduction of the human rights and labor principles of the UN Global Compact in connection with the Communication on Progress, review the rationale and the design of the human rights and labor sections of the questionnaire, and answer questions you may have. The Enhanced Communication on Progress has been designed to provide additional value to participating companies and their stakeholders. In particular, the Enhanced Communication on Progress will help participating companies build credibility and brand value, measure and demonstrate progress on the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact and the SDGs, receive insights and learn to improve their performance and drive impact on the 10 principles, and create some comparison points against peers. Before having a look at the overall structure of the questionnaire, let me remind you also about the timelines related to the Early Adopter Program. Again, the new Enhanced COP will be in place for all participating companies starting in 2023. For all of you, the early adopters that signed in to already start using the Enhanced COP this year in 2022, as you know, you will be able to access the COP digital platform starting in 1st April and have to provide and complete the questionnaire and the CEO statement of ongoing commitment by the end of May, by 31st May, when the submission period will close. Let us now have a look at the overall structure of the questionnaire. The question of the Communication on Progress is organized in 5 sections: governance, human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. The governance section provides a cross-cutting overview of the company's sustainability, governance, and structure and processes, while the remaining 4 sections go into greater details on topics connected to the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. Within each section of the questionnaire, the questions are grouped in different categories as they typically address the processes and policies that demonstrate a company's commitment to advance sustainability topics connected to the 10 principles, the efforts taken to prevent negative social and environmental impact on those topics, performance indicators, and response, remediation, and reporting mechanisms to address grievances and reflect on lessons learned. The questions addressing commitment, prevention, performance, and remediation practices and indicators connected to the areas of governance, human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption will help provide a holistic view of your organization's sustainability efforts. They will also help you identify gaps and set goals to drive impact. Let us have a look now at the type of questions formations that you will find in the questionnaire. Each question is structured to promote learning by embedding corporate best practices directly into the answer options. In many cases, the answer options show a progression that can showcase the company's continuous improvement year over year. For instance, in this question on the slide, the answers show a different levels of action. The company can answer that having a publicly statement commitment is not a priority. Sorry, apologies, one moment. Apologies for that. In many cases, the answer options show a progression that can showcase the company's improvement year over year. Furthermore, by using a metrics format, the participating company can compare their performance across topics. In this case, human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. All questions also come with an optional comment box where companies can choose to provide further commentary on the selected answers or insert links to relevant information. Other types of questions you might see include narrative submissions and quantitative metrics. At the end of each section on human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption, there's one narrative question where companies can briefly describe additional actions they are implementing and goals they have set to advance the 10 principles. And while all questions are mandatory, for some questions, you will have an opportunity to select answer options such as unknown or not applicable. Some questions will include the possibility to upload documents to provide evidence to the selected answers. In addition, the new system will allow you to also upload your sustainability or annual report as an attachment to the questionnaire. Uploading a sustainability or annual report is optional and not a requirement in the new communication on progress. Please also note that you will be able to download the questionnaire in Excel format in order to, among others, share it internally within your company. This was a broad overview about the overall structure and types of questions of the questionnaire. Before deep diving into the human rights and labor sections of the questionnaire, we will hear an introduction to the human rights and labor principles of the UN Global Compact and relevant international frameworks and standards. This will help provide a better understanding of the human rights and labor questions in the COP questionnaire. With that, I would now like to give the floor to my colleagues at the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights and the ILO. Thank you very much. Over to you, Adrienne.
Thank you very much, Bernard. And thank you very much for inviting the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to join this important session. It's a pleasure to be part of this discussion. First, I would like to commend the Global Compact for the great work that they have done in revising the Communication on Progress framework. It is a very important step, as the COP, the Communication on Progress, is a tool that is absolutely key to advance transparency and to advance corporate sustainability ultimately. So today we are diving into the human rights and labor segments of the new COP questionnaire. And as we start, I think it is important to take a step back and to turn our attention briefly to the principles to recall the context and the meaning of these reporting efforts. You all know that the Global Compact has been created to promote transparency and accountability and to support companies to apply a principled and value-based approach to their business. It is based on the understanding that business guided by values can significantly contribute to sustainable development, to justice, and peace. And this reporting framework, the Communication on Progress, is really an essential tool to pursue this ultimate objective. When a company joins the Global Compact, it does so by making a commitment to the Global Compact principles, a statement indicating that it shares and supports the values reflected in the principles, and a pledge to take action to translate those values into the DNA of its operations and policies. And it is very important to recognize that the principles of the Global Compact are not to be seen as sort of a standalone step or an entry point that companies need to get through to access the Global Compact, but their continued commitment is specifically focused on the Global Compact principles because they are the compass, the North Star that guide companies in efforts to conduct responsible business. So they are absolutely foundational. What are they, these two first principles focused on human rights? The first principle says that business should support and respect internationally proclaimed human rights. And the second principle says that business should make sure that they are not complicit in human rights abuses. They are both derived from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that proclaimed back in 1948 that human rights are universal rights afforded to each individual, that everyone has the right to be treated with dignity and is entitled to enjoy human rights without discrimination. And you may recall that the Universal Declaration on Human Rights in its preamble further stated that every individual and every organ of society shall strive to promote respect for these rights and shall strive to secure their recognition and observance. So it is explicitly, the declaration explicitly addressed everyone, all actors in society. And that's how it has provided the foundation for the first two Global Compact principles on human rights. These principles are anchoring the commitment of the global participants in universal values, and they are, so to speak, giving the direction of travel. They are fairly general, they are framed in fairly general terms, but we do have the UN guiding principles on business and human rights that had been endorsed unanimously by the Human Rights Council in 2011 that offer clarity, operational clarity for these two principles by setting out the global standards applicable to all businesses. So basically in the area of human rights, the first two Global Compact principles are the equivalent of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights that serve to operationalize them. The guiding principles on business and human rights spell out expectations on the one hand from states, on the other hand from business enterprises with regards to their respective duty to protect human rights and corporate responsibility to respect human rights. And they are of direct relevance to the commitments taken by the Global Compact participants. They provide clarity, operational clarity on the policies and processes that companies should develop and implement in order to ensure that they meet their responsibility to respect human rights. And as such, they provide a practical framework to implement the human rights commitments that companies make as part of becoming participants in the Global Compact. Why is that so important to do good human rights reporting, if I may say? We know that a growing number of companies now understand that human rights is crucial for responsible business and for the sustainability of their operation. But we also see a gap between commitment and action. And at the same time, we see that business are under growing pressure to be transparent about their non-financial performance. We see regulators, investors, civil society organizations, and consumers as well, demanding more and better information from companies about the impact their business has on the planet and on people as well. So it is increasingly evident that businesses need to improve the way they account for their impact on people. It is evident that human rights must be at the core of what they say, at the core of this reporting exercise, and also that if this exercise is done right, the reporting process can go beyond just a ticking the box exercise, and it can become a catalyst for positive transformation. Companies can and should use the reporting process as an opportunity to enhance internal conversations, to enhance external relationships as well in support of stronger human rights performance. Of course, we understand the challenges that companies and other stakeholders as well can face when writing, reading, or trying to make sense of human rights disclosure. It is an investment. It is taking time and efforts. We are aware of that. But it is also a reality that now all companies are expected to be able to explain how they identify their risks to people connected with their business and what they are doing to address them. And in the face of these expectations, a fortiori in several countries, we see now that these expectations are becoming legal requirements. We think it is absolutely key to apply a risk-based due diligence approach across all major areas of business as a way for companies to ensure that their risks and impacts can be identified, can be avoided when identified, and addressed effectively. And here, the new communication on progress is the tool that has been developed to support companies in this effort and to enable them to do just that, identify risk, avoid them, and address them effectively. And in this regard, communication with external stakeholders is key. So all in all, I just wanted to flag how good human rights reporting matters. It is a worthy effort, and it should not be seen as a requirement only, but also as an opportunity to learn, to shape business practice, to build relationships, and to ultimately, hopefully, enable market rewards. So I leave it at that for now, and leave the floor to Emily to talk about the labor principles. Thank you. Emily, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you, Adrienne. Over to you, Emily. Thank you very much.
Sorry. It doesn't matter how many years of using Zoom, and I still have a hard time with the mute button. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's always lovely to see my Global Compact colleagues and other UN colleagues. And hello to everyone. I just wanted to start by commending you, especially as sort of front runners in using the new communication on progress, but just your commitment to reporting in general. I didn't appreciate how complicated it is until I worked and with a small ad hoc team on the GRI and making sure everything was aligned in their general standard with labor principles. And it really struck me how challenging it is, even if you have a very clear understanding of the principle, exactly what data you would gather, especially if you're operating in multiple jurisdictions with very distinct reporting requirements, how you were going to aggregate all that data coming from different local operations, and the often challenges of understanding what's going on even in your first tier, let alone down your supply chain. I really was struck with how significant an exercise this is. And so I commend you for your commitment. And I also commend Global Compact because I think the way they have structured it, that allows for a fair amount of reflection and education in the way the questions are framed. Many of you probably don't need that, but some of your counterparts that are starting out probably will really benefit from it. But also sort of the simplicity, while at the same time giving sufficient information to really understand at least the basics of what's going on in a company. It's not a trivial exercise. So I really just wanted to give a shout out to the consultant who was really, Muriel, I think her name is, that really worked really hard on the text and has so much knowledge, but also the Global Compact colleagues. And I wish you the greatest of luck and success in using it, and look forward to your feedback for updates in the future. I just wanted to briefly touch on the origin of the labor principles that you see on your screen there, and you're probably very familiar with. I was asked to explain the origin of them and how they relate to the work of the ILO. These principles on freedom of association and collective bargaining, forced labor, child labor, and discrimination, they come from the 1998 Declaration of Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, which was adopted by the International Labor Conference. It was unanimously adopted, and what it's expressing is the basics that any country which is a member country of the ILO really ought to make a firm commitment and clear progress toward fully implementing, even if they don't ratify them, no matter what their level of development, because these are so fundamental. And in fact, in terms of the need for wealth or sophisticated administration compared to other labor standards, they really are achievable universally. But it's not just that. It's also because these are not just rights in themselves, but they are enabling rights. If you're in forced labor, forget about any of your other rights. No one is enrolling you in a pension fund. No one is bothering to sit down and bargain collectively with you. They probably aren't even paying you or paying you anywhere near an adequate wage, because that is just puts an end to all your other labor rights. If you're in discrimination and shut out of certain occupations, or you're able to be hired but only shunted into particular jobs and never have a chance to develop yourself through training or promotional opportunities, or you're paid differently than your male colleagues, all of those things have a detrimental effect across all your rights again, because ultimately you're lesser valued or devalued in your enterprise or in your community or in the sector that you're operating in, and people don't take your rights seriously. If you are taken out of school too young as a child laborer, you, your family, your community, and your country as a whole are deprived of your ability to reach your best potential to really thrive and enjoy what you're doing, instead of being stuck in doing something that you've done since you were 8, 10 years old and you had no choice. And the whole country suffers as a result. And of course, freedom of association and collective bargaining, those are enabling rights because workers are able to speak. They're able to defend themselves. They're able to, but they can only do that collectively because of the asymmetry of power between employers and workers. So being able to join their voice together to negotiate a framework of how the relationship between management and workers will unfold in the 3 or 5 years that the framework, the collective bargaining agreement is applicable, really helps them to defend their own rights. Because what you ultimately want is not a paternalistic model of labor rights and human rights in general, but to be able to empower each rights holder to be able to speak up and defend their rights themselves. And that's what freedom of association and collective bargaining are about. So that's why they're so fundamental, as the Declaration states. But they don't come out of nowhere. The Declaration, in turn, is based on 8 international conventions, 2 for each of the 4 principles that you see, plus a couple of recommendations for each of the 4 principles that really detail more extensive and one protocol on forced labor, I forgot. But what they're doing is in more detail describing what exactly are the rights and what governments should be doing to ensure full protection of those rights. But I didn't want to stop there, because as the Global Compact has their tools and resources and trainings and webinars very clearly illustrate, these are, again, enabling rights. So once you enter the world of these 4 fields of labor rights, you start to very quickly come up to wages and hours of work and safety and health and migrant workers' rights and what happens to people who lose their jobs suddenly and have no ability to quickly gain employment somewhere else. All these sorts of labor rights are a natural extension of having deliberately been put on the path or chosen to go down the path of respecting these 4 labor principles. And it's great. And it's challenging at the same time. So I really appreciate all the wonderful work that the Global Compact is doing to try and help you as you move along in your journey. And a lot of those issues in the progress is also reflected in the communication on progress itself. But the last thing I wanted to mention was there's also another instrument, the ILO M&E Declaration. And this is sort of a complement to the Global Compact, although it precedes it, it's from 1977. But what it's doing is basically capturing all of SDG 8 on inclusive economic growth and decent work. So it's talking about the broader role of companies and not just about rights, a rights-based approach to effective management of a company, but also with an eye towards their broader contributions to economic and social development, employment creation, skills development, spillovers of technology, but also just what an invaluable example they can be operating in local enterprises or local clusters and alongside enterprises who haven't seen such good practices, or in communications and dialogues with their suppliers. So it's a holistic instrument that talks to companies, but it also talks to governments, because one of the critical elements is companies don't operate in a vacuum. They operate in a legal environment and a policy environment that either is sending them signals and supporting them and creating an enabling environment, or creating a tension within the company. Do I respect the law that maybe conflicts? Do I follow the policy path of, say, particular ministries that aren't necessarily interested in rights, but really just want to accelerate economic development at all costs? This is trying to create a holistic framework for government policymaking, so that tension that often, it doesn't completely hinder companies succeed anyway, but it makes the battle much more uphill and much harder for the smaller, not as developed companies to get on board with. It's trying to minimize that and have a more coherent approach, so that these are not behaviors of certain model companies that are doing great things, but against the norm, but it simply becomes the norm. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Adrienne and Emily, for your remarks, and also to the ILO and the Office of the High Commissioner for their support, technical input, and advice in developing the communication on progress questionnaire and guiding tools. With that, I will give the floor now to my colleagues, Grit and Colleen, who will provide us with a deeper overview of the human rights and labor sections in the COP questionnaire. Over to you, Grit and Colleen.
Thank you very much, Bernard, and thanks, Emily and Adrienne, to introducing the Human Rights and Labor section. Just a brief introduction of myself. I'm Grit Katar. I'm the head of labor rights within the UN Global Compact, and I will present this section together with my colleague, Colleen Connors. Colleen, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Colleen Connors, and I'm the Senior Manager for Human Rights and Decent Work at the UN Global Compact, and I will be going over the human rights questions of the questionnaire today. Thank you.
So briefly, just to introduce the overview of the section, like Bernard already mentioned, the Human Rights and Labor section is organized in the same way as the other sections on governance and on environment and anti-corruption. So it's looking first at a policy commitment, then we look, there are 2 questions related to this, this part, then we look at the prevention, there are 4 questions on that. Then for labor specifically, there are some performance, some outcome indicators, which are requested to fill in. There are 6 questions on it, 6 indicators. And then the last part is the response, remediation, and reporting. So as we had in the session yesterday, we covered the governance section. In the governance section, we have already some questions on human rights and labor included. These were looking really at the labor principles and the human rights principles in general. So this was covered yesterday, and today we will look really at the specific sessions on human rights and labor.
We will now go deeper into each section for human rights, followed by labor. In the human rights and labor sections, the Communication on Progress questionnaire dives deeper into specific human rights and labor rights topics as listed below. When starting the section, your organization is going to be asked to select material topics related to human rights and labor, though as my colleague Greet will explain later, there are mandatory labor topics. The human rights questions that ask companies to only report on their most material or salient risks, not the topics where your organization may have a policy in place. Therefore, you will need to know which human rights are material issues for your company connected with its operations and/or value chain based on their salience, or in other words, the most severe potential negative impacts on people, or another basis. Another way to think about salient human rights issues is to understand them as those human rights that stand out because they are at risk of the most grievous negative impact related to your company's activities or business relationships. It's important to know that the questions following this will be tailored based on the questions selected before.
Now, it's good to know that for the labor questions, so they are centered around the 4 labor principles. Plus, we also included occupational safety and health as a mandatory question for all companies because it's an essential aspect of decent work. Now, we have seen a question yesterday coming in about what we understand about occupational safety and health. Now, we identify occupational safety and health as a discipline that is dealing with the prevention of work-related injuries and diseases and the protection and promotion of the health of workers. So that is a definition that we use for occupational safety and health. Now, all these 5 questions are mandatory for all companies. Now, if your company is also marking working conditions, which includes wages and working conditions as a material risk, you will also have to fill in these questions related to working conditions, and they will appear in the labor section.
So once again, for labor, there will be some mandatory questions for human rights. This is again based on your most material or salient risks. And matrices like these that you'll see will only be populated for the human rights issues that were selected in the first human rights question. So for example, a policy specific to your material or human rights can help your company identify and manage risks, mitigate negative impacts, and structure a response for incidents by providing a structured process to address these issues. Throughout the questionnaire, you should answer options that are tied to best practices, such as the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which, as Adrian explained earlier, operationalize our human rights principles. If you respond that your company has a policy in place, you will be asked to provide details on how the policy has been established, which is similar to the labor section. While some questions are asking you to select which option best matches current practices, others are going to be more quantitative measures to gauge your company's performance, building out the performance section of the questionnaire. Drawing from this statement, the question aims to present further detail on the nature of the organization's human rights policies in a structured and transparent manner.
And maybe good to mention that for the labor rights, you can also opt to say that it's not applicable. So you can select that answer if it's not material to your business, but then you will have to give an explanation why it is not, why you're not responding to that policy.
Now you'll be asked about the steps taken to cease or prevent the impact. So for stakeholder engagement, engagement with affected stakeholders or their legitimate representatives enhances outcomes on labor rights and human rights issues and is a key part of due diligence and risk assessment processes. Organizations should strive to understand the specific impacts on people given a specific context of operation. Prevention and mitigation. Once your company has established a policy and conducted appropriate risk and impact assessments, it should take the necessary steps to cease or prevent impact. If your business has leverage to prevent or mitigate the adverse impact, it should exercise it. And if it lacks this leverage, there may be other ways for the enterprise to increase it. Leverage may be increased, for example, by offering capacity building or other incentives related to the entity or collaborating with other actors. Training. This disclosure gives insights into how the organization embeds its policy commitments for responsible business conduct, including the commitment to respect human rights and labor rights through its activities and business relationships. And finally, looking at progress. This is going to be really tracking the effectiveness of actions as necessary for an organization to learn if its policies and processes are really making a difference and being implemented optimally. It is also necessary for knowing if your company has responded effectively to the impacts and to also drive continuous improvement.
Now, if you look at the performance indicators, these indicators are outcome indicators, and these are only applicable for the labor section. So only for the labor questions, we have these kind of questions. There are 6 indicators that we are asking. The first 2 are referring to the principle 3 of freedom of association and collective bargaining. So the first question is asking the percentage of employees that are covered under collective bargaining agreements. Now, collective bargaining agreements, and you can find explanations how to calculate what the definitions are. You can find all this information in the guide that is also available, where you can also find where it's linked to if there is alignment with the GRI standard. You can find the more information on that in the guide. Now, collective bargaining, it's referring to all negotiations which take place between one or more employers' organizations at one hand, and on the other hand, one or more workers' organizations. It's a voluntary process, and it's really to discuss and to determine working conditions and terms of employment. So it's really about joint decision-making that we are referring to. It can also happen at various levels. It can happen at the industry level or at the organizational level or both. It's really fully aligned with the GRI standard, so more information in the guide. The second question is really looking at the percentage of employees in a trade union or other workers' organizations. So this is really referring to the principle 3 on the freedom of association right, which is really recognized as a human right. Now, the third and the fourth indicator, they are both referring to gender equality. So it's also related to our principle 6 on discrimination. So the first one is asking about the percentage of women in leadership roles. So it's really to understand the gender gap at the highest level of leadership. The indicator on pay ratio, it's asking about the average ratio of the basic salary and the remuneration of women and men. So this is really about pay equity. Now, what we are asking here is the average pay ratio number, so the percentage. So we are asking to calculate the pay ratio for all of the jobs at equal level. So it's really to calculate the pay ratio for different jobs and then to calculate the average percentage at the end and to report only the average number. And then the 5th and 6th indicator, they both refer to our the occupational safety and health principle. So it's really to report the number of injuries that happen. The first one is really talking about the harm that workers are suffering from. It's not the efficiency. The incident rate is more calculated, more referring to the efficiency that companies are dealing with occupational safety and health at the work floor. But for the exact definitions, I would really like to refer you to the guide where you can find all the information about the exact definitions.
Thanks, Greet. And so now we are at response, remediation, and reporting. So a note on remediation. Even with the best policies and practices in place, your company may still cause or contribute to negative impacts that it is not anticipated or been able to prevent. So either through your due diligence process or by other means, your company may determine that active engagement in remediation is needed in order to respect human rights, either by itself or you may do it in cooperation with others. Operational level grievance mechanisms for those potentially impacted by your company's activities can be one effective means of enabling remediation. Another important note is that where negative impacts have occurred, but your business has not itself caused or contributed to, but may be directly linked to your company's operations, products and services, or even by your business relationships, the responsibility to respect human rights does not require that your company itself provide for remediation. However, it may take a role in doing so. Some situations, you can think of those in which crimes are alleged, typically will require cooperation with judicial mechanisms. These are going to be simple yes or no questions, but they will offer your company the option to select choose to not disclose. If you select this option, you will then be prompted to provide an explanation. For practical actions, we'll ask you to briefly describe the practical actions that your company has taken during the reporting period and or plans to take to implement the human rights principles, including challenges faced and actions taken towards prevention and remediation. This open section is for your company to provide further context and relevant information not covered in the previous questions, including recent activities or challenges that you faced.
And we would also like to mention that we are developing it. Some of them are already developed, but some of them we are in the process of finalizing them. There will be specific courses to explain what it entails, so to give further guidance to companies to understand what the policy should look like, what a training should look like. That will be developed for the labor part. We are developing it and will be launched in upcoming May. We're working together with the ILO on this e-learning course, which will have 6 modules. One to introduce the decent work concept in general, and then the 4 labor principles plus occupational safety and health. So each of these modules will take 30 to 40 minutes to take. There is the assessment wherein the indicators of the COP are also included, so where you can find much more guidance and explanation of what these principles entails, how to implement the actions. And this exists also for the human rights principles, Colleen.
Yes, so we already have, I've just dropped in the chat, the e-learning course on our human rights principles and the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. This is really thinking about how to take practical actions, really understanding what human rights means to your business. We really recommend everyone take this course. Important to know right now, it is available in English. And in the next couple of weeks, it will also be available in French, Spanish, and Portuguese with Chinese to follow.
And maybe good to know, Colleen, is that these tools are also available for free for the broader audience. So just check on the website of the UN Global Compact where you can access all these tools. There is also the reference to the ILO help desk. Emily is leading on that, where you can also find a lot of information for business on the international labor standards.
Thank you so much, Colleen and Ingrid, and thank you everybody again for joining, and we will be happy now to take a few questions. I see there are 2 questions on materiality in the chat. So we do not prescribe a specific materiality assessment process to be implemented, but there is a good practice and guidance out there, for instance, from the GRI. So you can, for example, follow the standard that GRI sets on materiality.
I see, Bernard, there's also a question about the percentage of employees who are in trade unions. So this is also, there is an option that you don't disclose this information. So that's perfectly okay. And you can also explain that there is an explanation box. So it's not mandatory if you don't have this information, if you cannot share it.
There is also a question that has been asked about disclosing data related to union membership. And there is a national legislation that does not allow for companies either to collect and or to disclose that data. I'm not sure if you have comments on that, colleagues, but we will review also the questionnaire to see if some of these questions need the option of not applicable to be added. In any case, you can always use the text box to specify, for example, this type of information.
Yeah, and there's always the option to explain more. So I see also that there is a question on collective bargaining agreements in different jurisdictions. So that is also optional. You can always add an explanation to the question.
There's a question on indicators and numerical data. And again, we would like to refer to the guidebook that we have released that includes calculations and additional information. That information of the guidebook will also be available on the digital platform in itself for easy use and reference.
There's also a question on the number of the human rights risks that are material and that are mandatory to respond. So if you select the risks as material, you will have to answer these additional questions related to policy, to remediation. All of that will be mandatory if you would have marked it, selected it as a material risk. But for as said, for the labor questions, all 5 topics are mandatory to answer.
And indeed, and we decided on the question HR1 to put a cap to selection of 5 topics max. So if these 5 topics include the labor risk, that is fine. If you have other topics that you have identified as material, as explained in this session, you will nevertheless have to answer the questions on the labor rights as they are directly related to our 10 principles.
And Bernard, I saw also a question, I think it was yesterday, that was also a question about if you have a policy on a specific topic, but the topic is not material, you will not answer these questions. It's really only asking about the material risks.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And there's a question about if the policy has to be explicit or can be general. But we're asking if it addresses certain topics so that you can disclose. And some companies may choose to have one policy document that covers a variety of topics. Others may choose to have different standalone policies. That may depend on how you want to proceed and what is most valuable to address the risk and impacts.
And also just to add, as we mentioned, we are building these e-learning tools, which will give much more guidance and explanation on the COP questions. So it will really explain what it means, a good, for example, child labor policy, what it should cover. So much more information can be found in the e-learning tools.
There's a question on the performance questions and SMEs. Most typically for the numerical questions, you would not need to include your suppliers, except if deemed relevant. You can specify so also in the optional text box.
There is also a question on how far to go in the supply chain. So for most of the questions, especially for the child labor and forced labor, for example, it will ask you to go into your entire supply chain to really assess the risk in your value chain.
There's a very specific question about if mental health is included in the injury category. I am not sure colleagues can answer this now, but otherwise we will be happy also to provide a written answer to this type of very technical questions.
Yeah, the definition is included in the guide, and it's referring to the definition of the GRI standards. Yeah, also for the leadership indicator, so the gender gap, that's also included in the guide.
I think Adrienne wanted to come in. Adrienne, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Colleen. Yes, I just wanted to add a few words to this question about how far into the supply chain companies are expected to go when they assess their material risk, because as Kate said, it is expected that companies look at the entire supply chain, and this is very, very important. At the same time here, what I wanted to flag in relation to reporting is that of course, we are aware that if it's something that hasn't been done, this assessment hasn't been done at all so far by a company, it is difficult to have all that done in one go on time to submit the communication on progress. But what's most important is really to see that as an imperative, to invest time and efforts into assessing the supply chain to identify human rights and labor risks and the risks related to the different topics addressed by the communication on progress, and to have a clear plan on how to go about this assessment, how to go about identifying these negative impacts and addressing them. Where the communication on progress is really key here is that it will be the way to demonstrate over time how you have progressed in this difficult exercise. It's not that we're saying it's something that can be done in 2 weeks, summarized in the COP and submitted. Maybe not. Maybe it will require to, in the first place or the first year, acknowledge that there are still zones that are unclear and more research and efforts that need to be conducted. But precisely for this reason, the COP is important, because over time it shows how the company has progressed, and that's what is expected. So that's all I wanted to say in relation to this question. Just to make sure that participants are not discouraged in the first place, but to the contrary, encouraged to undertake this big task, knowing that they will progress over time and be able to communicate that to the external world to show how they progress.
Just going back to the safety and health question and whether mental health is included, I'm not 100% sure about the COP itself, but definitely in the ILO, mental health is very central. And so, for instance, our Convention on Violence and Harassment at Work, it's treated both as a discrimination issue and as a safety and health issue. And it's both. That's not the only source. Mental health can be just overwork or kind of the stress and pressures at work, but a lot of it has to do around the environment, the working environment, and how that can traumatize individual workers. So for us, and I would invite you to look at the convention and the recommendation, but it definitely is a central part of health and well-being of workers.
There's also a question on the translations. So we are in the process of translating the COP questionnaire and relevant resources, starting with the 6 formal UN languages. Those translations will be available in PDF format over the coming weeks, by May the latest. But for early adopters, the digital platform to input the answers to the questionnaire and submit the questionnaire online, that will be available in English only for early adopters. Coming year, the digital platform will offer the COP questionnaire for submission in a variety of languages also. We will start again with the 6 formal UN languages and provide also additional translations over time. There's a question also about how material aspects can change over time. Yes, that is true. That could affect comparability. It is likely that some material topics remain material over a longer period of time, but in case there are different material topics prioritized by the company or identified over years, that could affect to a certain extent the comparability of the data over time. That is true. We have a more specific question on the coverage of collective bargaining agreements in different jurisdictions. We can also follow up in writing, except if my colleagues want to provide an answer here. Otherwise, we will be happy to follow up in writing.
That is one of many topics when I alluded in my introduction, commending you for your hard work. It's not the only thing that was a challenge, but it definitely is a challenge when you have different reporting requirements or sometimes confidentiality requirements at national level that forbid you. But it may be that you could partially disclose and explain for other jurisdictions. The law prohibits it if you want to be as expansive in your disclosure as possible. But as Greet said, that's actually my understanding is that's optional whether to report on the percentage. And so instead you might want to use your text box to explain why you're not reporting and instead focus on what you're doing to support and encourage collective bargaining as appropriate in the various jurisdictions in your own operations and in your supply chains.
Yes, as you said, Emily, I think for these questions, it's really important that we have the open text box where you can add some explanation and some more details on it's not really about the number as such, but you can really explain how you are recognizing and endorsing the right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And with that, I see we are reaching our time. Just to remind our early adopters, our participants, that you will receive a communication in the following days with additional information related to the login to the platform, as well as a demo session that we plan to use. In the Academy, you can also see and enroll for the next content sessions that we will provide on the environment section and on the section on anti-corruption of the questionnaire. And we also invite you again to check our resources, particularly the guidebook that provides additional context and information. We will follow up also with and put an answer to some of the questions that may not have been answered in the Academy landing page of the Communication on Progress. With that, I would like to thank all our participants for attending today's session. And a big thank you also to our speakers, Greet, Colleen, and our partner organizations, Adrienne and Emily, for attending today and supporting us in this very important new chapter of the UN Global Compact, the new and enhanced Communication on Progress. Thank you so much to everybody, and talk to you soon.
Thanks to you.
Good luck. Thank you
very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Bernard. Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.